4 in the morning. Central Italy. A village called Rada in Chianti, surrounded by vineyards that have been producing wine for 600 years. It is pitch dark, cold enough to see your breath, and somewhere in those hills, a 41-year-old woman from Minnesota is about to do something that makes no sense on paper. Her name is Courtney Dauwalter, and she is not supposed to be here. 3 days earlier, she was on a completely different island, the Canary Islands, off the coast of Africa. Packed, tapered, and ready to race. Then a storm system rolled in. Wind, rain, snow. Race canceled. Most athletes would fly home and call it a loss. Dauwalter booked a flight to Tuscany. She registered for a completely different race. 120 kilometers through mountain terrain with over 17,000 feet of climbing, and showed up at the start line with zero preparation for this specific course and this specific field. And then, with 11.5 hours of racing behind her, she was still in third place. With 15 kilometers left, she was 4 minutes behind the leader. 4 minutes, after 105 kilometers. That gap is not supposed to close. And she closed it. She won. But here is the whole point of this video. Courtney Dauwalter does not use GPS during her races. She has no coach. She does not analyze pace splits or heart rate zones. By every modern endurance performance playbook, she is doing it wrong. And she is, by nearly every measurable standard, the greatest ultramarathon runner alive. In 2017, she won the Moab 240 endurance run outright. Not the women's division. Outright. She finished roughly 10 hours ahead of the next finisher, who was a man, on a 383-kilometer course through the Utah desert. In the summer of 2023, she did something no human being, male or female, had ever done before. She won the Western States 100, the Hard Rock 100, and the UTMB, the 3 most prestigious ultramarathons on the planet, within a single season. 70 days, 3 races, 3 wins, 3 course records. She lowered the Western States women's record by over an hour and 15 minutes in 1 race. And just days before this episode, she was stranded on a Spanish island by a snowstorm, rerouted to Italy with 48 hours notice, and still came from behind to win, at 41 years old. Now here is what her training looks like. She runs approximately 115 miles per week. No coach, no Strava, no fixed workout schedule. Her words in almost every interview for 10 years, "I go by how my body feels and how my brain feels. I let my feet guide me when I leave my house every day." No periodization, no zone 2 blocks, no structured sessions on a calendar. How does someone win at that level without the tools modern sports science says are essential? The answer starts with a Swedish scientist most people outside exercise physiology have never heard of. Gunnar Borg was born in Sweden in 1927. He was not a runner. He was a psychophysicist, someone who studied how the human mind translates physical sensations into numbers. And in 1982, after decades of experiments, he published a scale that would quietly change exercise science forever. The Borg Scale, 6 to 20, where 6 feels like sitting in a chair and 20 feels like your heart is trying to escape your chest. The elegant part is this. Borg designed the scale so that for a young, healthy adult, the number you choose multiplied by 10 would approximate your heart rate in beats per minute. Choose 13. That is around 130 beats per minute. A machine and a feeling, producing the same number. A landmark analysis reviewed 111 separate studies and found that perceived exertion correlated with heart rate, blood lactate, and oxygen consumption across thousands of subjects, athletes, cardiac patients, trained and untrained. The same internal thermometer, reliably accurate across almost every human population. That same scale is used today in cardiac rehabilitation units, in military training assessments, and even in paramedic CPR rotation protocols. It is one of the most universally applied physiological tools in human history. It costs nothing, requires no battery, and lives entirely inside you. What Borg proved is that the human body already contains a sensor more sophisticated than anything you can strap to your wrist. The problem is that most of us have never learned to read it. Courtney Dauwalter has been reading it for 15 years across thousands of hours on mountain terrain. Her internal dial is not broken. It is calibrated to a level of precision most athletes never reach. But the sensation of effort that Borg was measuring, it turns out, does not actually come from your muscles. It comes from somewhere else entirely. In 1997, a South African exercise scientist named Tim Noakes said something so radical that mainstream physiology mostly ignored it for years. Fatigue is not a physical event. It is a decision made by your brain. For decades, the dominant theory was peripheral. You get tired because your muscles accumulate lactic acid, because your glycogen stores hit empty. The body fails and you slow down. Noakes said you have that completely backwards. He called his theory the central governor model. Your brain is not passively receiving distress signals from failing muscles. It is actively and continuously regulating how many muscle fibers you are allowed to recruit, based on a real-time calculation of how safe your current effort is given how far you still need to go. You do not slow down because you ran out of energy. You slow down because your brain decided you might run out, and it protected you in advance. And this idea was not even new. A Nobel laureate named Archibald Hill proposed an almost identical concept in 1924. Nobody followed up on it. It was buried for 73 years. Physiology spent most of the 20th century looking in the wrong direction, at the muscles, not the brain. Now let's go back to Tuscany. 105 kilometers in. Night has long fallen. Courtney Dauwalter is running in complete darkness. Her legs are wrecked from 17,000 feet of climbing and descent. Her glycogen is gone. Every muscle fiber in her quads is firing distress signals, and she is 4 minutes behind the leader with 15 kilometers left. 4 minutes. At that stage of a race, the body is not just tired, it is chemically compromised. Muscle damage from hours of downhill running, inflammatory markers that would look like a trauma response in a lab, a cardiovascular system already running near its ceiling. The rational thing, the thing every number on every screen would tell you, is to manage the gap and finish strong in third. But something different happened. With around 10 kilometers to go, Dauwalter began to move. Not a desperate lunge, a controlled, deliberate acceleration. The kind that only comes from someone who has learned to distinguish between what the body says it has left and what it actually has left. She passed Entrekin, then she passed Kaspersen. She crossed the finish line in first place. That surge, the ability to accelerate after hours of apparent maximum effort, is exactly what the central governor model predicts and explains. As the finish approaches and the brain recalculates the risk horizon, it releases motor units it had been holding in reserve. Research confirms this. The end sprint is accompanied by measurable increases in electrical activity in the locomotor muscles. The brain is literally recruiting more fibers at the moment of apparent exhaustion. Those fibers were available the whole time. Dauwalter's 15 years of experience have taught her brain exactly how far to negotiate with that governor before it actually has nothing left to give. What looks like Courtney Dauwalter's radical rejection of technology is actually the oldest tradition in endurance sport. Paavo Nurmi, the Flying Finn, won 9 Olympic gold medals between 1920 and 1928, running with a stopwatch in his hand, not to go faster, but to distribute effort evenly through internal feel. Emil Zatopek held 18 world records in the 1940s and 50s, training entirely by perceived effort, including an unprecedented 5,000, 10,000, and marathon triple at the Helsinki Games, in a marathon he had never raced before. Arthur Lydiard, the New Zealand coach who revolutionized distance running in the 1960s, built his entire system around effort fractions, asking athletes to run at 1/4, 1/2, or 3/4 of their maximum, allowing pace to come up naturally as fitness improved. He was describing perceived exertion zones a full decade before Borg gave them a number. And today, studies of Kenyan and Ethiopian training groups, who have dominated distance running for most of the last 50 years, show that many elite athletes train on forest trails with no GPS, letting effort and conversation set the pace. The technology changes, the principle does not. Now the honest part, because I am a physical therapist, and I would be doing you a disservice if I told you to throw your Garmin in the trash. Perceived exertion becomes reliable in proportion to training experience. Novice runners frequently misjudge effort, often believing they are at an easy 5 out of 10 when their heart rate is at 85% of maximum. They train too hard on easy days and wonder why they keep getting injured. In clinical populations, people in cardiac rehabilitation or on certain medications, perceived exertion can dangerously underestimate physiological strain, and in those situations a heart rate monitor is protective, not optional. Even Dauwalter uses her watch retrospectively. When she feels unusually tired, she looks back at the data to understand why. She is not flying blind. She is flying by feel, with data as a backstop. The lesson is not to abandon your watch. The lesson is that the watch is not the pilot. You are. The emerging consensus in sports science is not data versus intuition. It is data to train intuition. You use objective measurements early in your training career to calibrate your internal sensations. Then over years, you shift the weight toward internal feedback until the sensor inside you is trustworthy enough to guide the work. Start with the data. Build toward the feel. And before I show you how the story in Italy ends, there is one last thing Courtney does that science just confirmed. And it is so simple, it almost feels like a cheat code. A study on running performance found that simply smiling, not checking a split, not calculating a pace, just physically turning up the corners of your mouth, improved running economy by approximately 3% compared to frowning. 3% over 26 miles is around 5 minutes at the finish line. It costs nothing. And it works because it feeds positive information directly into the same neural system your central governor uses to decide how hard you are actually working. Your brain interprets the smile as a signal that things are okay, that the threat is manageable, and it loosens the governor just enough to let more through. Dauwalter smiles through the pain cave. She calls it the most important place in a race. Not a place to fear, a place to go find out what you are made of. It is 5:30 in the morning in Rada in Chianti. The sun is not up yet. Courtney Dauwalter is running through complete darkness, through a vineyard that has been growing grapes since before running shoes were invented. And she is 4 minutes behind. And she is 41 years old, and she was not supposed to be in this race at all. And her brain, calibrated by 10,000 training hours, makes a calculation. It says, "We have more. Let's go get it." No GPS needed. If you want to keep learning how to hack your own central governor through the science of performance, hit subscribe and come back for every episode. I am Sebastian from the Injury Breakdown. And if this got you thinking about what the brain can actually do at the absolute ceiling of human performance, our next video is going to blow your mind. We are breaking down Kristian Blummenfelt and the VO2 max numbers that made the entire sports science world stop and ask, is this real or is this fake? See you there.